Hello, everyone. Tony Costa here from Toronto Apologetics. So glad that you guys could join us tonight. And I'm really excited about our discussion that we're going to be having tonight on the Shroud of Turin. Just want to welcome all of you if you are new to Toronto Apologetics. Subscription to the channel is absolutely free. So all you guys have to do is just go down to the subscription box at the bottom and just click on that subscribe button and you will be in, and you'll get access to videos like this, interviews, and so forth. So we just want to welcome you to that. Now, the other thing I also wanted to mention here is my new book, No King But Christ, has come out. The gray bar there this is just a print copy, so that's why you have a gray bar there saying not for resale value and so forth. But anyway, those of you who are interested, No King But Christ, The Collapse and Bankruptcy of Secular Worldviews is now out. In fact, it came out on Christmas Eve of all times. And so I thought it was quite apropos that Christmas Eve, where we celebrate the birth of the King of Kings, the book came out. And so it is available on Amazon. So wherever you are on planet Earth, if you have access to the internet, make sure you get a copy of No King But Christ. And so we've had a lot of good reviews on that, and I'm very thankful for that. And also thankful for just my subscribers and many friends who've also passed it along and shared it with others. And so, folks, tonight we are going to be looking at the famous Shroud of Turin. And I am delighted to have with me today none other than my dear brother in Christ and friend, Dale Glover from Real Seekers. And this young man is not a stranger to me. He was actually one of my students at Toronto Baptist Seminary. And when I first met you, Dale, I just remember you were just questioning everything. And I like that about you. You were very inquisitive. You wanted to know about, are the prophecies of the Bible accurate? Were they written after the fact? And so you had tons and tons and tons of questions. And so I invested as much time as I could, the amount of time that I had. And then I remember referring you to our common friend, Dr. Gary Habermas from Liberty University, who is a specialist in the resurrection and is also written on the Shroud. And so from there on in, I just remembered you just grew in leaps and bounds. And I also had the honor of baptizing you. And I will never forget that. That was such an awesome. So instead of me just chattering on, Dale, maybe you can add a little bit more to that and just tell us about your journey and, of course, your days of, the skeptical years that you went through and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as Tony kind of said, I met him. I was basically coming right out of my phase, my agnostic phase. When I lost my faith, I grew up a Christian in the Baptist denomination and that sort of thing. And for me, I never really had doubts about the faith or serious doubts until my first full-time job. And there I was kind of engaging with Jehovah's Witnesses and then later on a bunch of atheists. And this ultimately kind of led me to lose my faith. And I left the faith. And I went through a 6-month period as an agnostic. And I was just coming out of that and kind of saying, yeah, I do believe in God when I entered Tony Costa. So I started researching the religions. And I took a world religions class with Tony. And yeah, I remember week after week sitting in your office. You were going over all my questions, my skeptical questions, stuff like that. So yeah, you were a great help. I'm always thankful for the service you did for me, as well as Gary and others helping me along the way. But basically, it took me about 8 years. It was in May 5th, 2018, when I realized, look, the evidence clearly supports Christianity, and I committed my life to Christ on that basis ever since. And been doing my apologetics program, being a Christian apologist on my Real Seekers podcast and stuff like that. And I earned a master's in philosophy. So
That's great. That's great, Dale. And of course, I also got to know your parents as well for a bit, and spoke at your former church, and just the way you have really moved forward, and I've been on your Real Seekers podcast, taking on a couple of friends on the ontological argument and just dealing with other issues, and so I really appreciate that about your ministry. And so, folks, if you're interested in Dale's ministry and his YouTube channel, it's all in the description box. You can just go there, visit Dale's YouTube channel. He's got a lot of big hitters on there, Resurrection of Jesus specialists like Habermas and Michael Licona and many others. So I would really encourage you to go there. So Dale, what is it about the Shroud of Turin that really interested you?
Yeah, so for me, I'm kind of a weirdo in that the historicity of the Shroud of Turin, originally for me, I just dismissed the shroud. Oh, it's a Roman Catholic relic. That's not for me as a true Bible believing Protestant. And I never really cared about the historicity aspect. For me, when I was doing my research phase, at least, it was, can we prove these images are miraculous? And when I saw like a good Protestant like Gary Habermas really defending the shroud, that kind of made me sit up and pay attention. So for me, at least during the research phase, my most important aspect is the science of the images and proving that these actually do constitute a supernatural sign from God that Jesus rose from the dead.
Right. And so I know you looked at it from a historical perspective, and then of course you looked at the scientific side of things. Mm-hmm. And so maybe what you can do, Dale, I know you have a PowerPoint slide presentation. Yeah. Maybe we can look at that and you can go over it with us and just maybe explain to us why you think the Shroud of Turin is the Shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, again, there's a lot of questions a lot of folks have about, did Jesus really leave something behind like that? Or is it possible that the shroud is a hoax? Is it possible that this was the work of an artist? And so, as you know, evangelical Protestant Christians get very squeamish about relics or things perceived to be relics or idols, images of sorts. And so there seems to be a reluctance on the part of, I think, mostly Protestant evangelical Christians about accepting any images of Jesus that become objects of veneration or you think of, again, it is a relic in the city of Turin where it's housed in the church. It is venerated by many Roman Catholics. But then again, whether it's the image of Jesus or not is irrelevant to whether it's venerated or not. Those are two different categories. And so maybe you can share with us from your slide presentation, Dale, why you think or believe that this shroud is the shroud of the historical Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll just bring that up. And while I'm sharing my screen here, so thankfully, I eventually, after I realized the shroud was evidence of the miraculous, I did get into the historical questions as well. So let me just share the screen there.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. There we go.
And okay. All right. That's showing up.
Yes, very nicely.
All right. So I've split this up into two parts for the presentation. One is on the historical evidence, the other on the scientific. So in terms of the history of the shroud, obviously the uncontroversial history where shroud skeptics and pro-shroud guys, we all agree that the shroud goes back to the mid-1350s in Liry, France. Now the shroud skeptics, they will say, well, that's it. That's when the shroud came into being. It's just another Roman Catholic fake relic, like hundreds of other fake relics and stuff like that. And the first owner was a knight guy by the name of Geoffrey de Charny, and he started exhibiting the shroud in about 1355, 1356 in his church. Obviously, pro-shroud authenticists such as myself We say, no, this thing actually covered the historical Jesus in Jerusalem around 30 AD. And we have to, because of that, we have to provide a pre-medieval history, at least a plausible one. And on that front, I think there are at least two major pro-shroud hypotheses. So the first, this one is the most famous. Everybody knows about this. It's the image of Edessa theory. So this was first proposed by Ian Wilson back in about 1978. And it essentially says, well, look, after Jesus died on the cross and left behind his burial shroud and rose and ascended, the shroud was taken by one of his disciples to the kingdom of Edessa. And this converted King Abgar V, and they kept the shroud in Edessa for about 940 years until it was finally brought to Constantinople. And from there, the French Crusaders came during the Fourth Crusade. They stole the shroud and brought it to France. But there is another theory. This is the one I myself go for by my friend Jack Marquardt, called the image of God incarnate. This is another cloth with images that's said to be, I don't know how to say that Greek word, Tony, you can help me, but archipoieta.
Okay.
It just basically means it's not made with human hands.
Right.
For them, it's not an artwork kind of thing. And alternatively, this says that the shroud went from Jerusalem to Antioch and was held in Antioch for the first 5.5 centuries. And then from there, it was brought to Constantinople. And then during the 1200s, it was transferred to France by the Latin emperors of the Byzantine Empire. So that in a nutshell is kind of the theories. But theories are great. What we need is evidence to adjudicate, well, who's right? So on this front, I think it's really crucial, because you'll see shroud skeptics. They'll pick up on the one piece of evidence or this, or even on the pro-shroud side. Sometimes we'll point to these one or two pieces of evidence. But really, you have to make your assessment based on the totality of all the evidence. And there are at least 18 pieces of evidence showing that the shroud predates the medieval period. By contrast, the skeptics really only have 2, or if I'm generous, 3 pieces of evidence showing that the shroud is medieval in origin. So kind of looking, what are some of these evidences? Well, on the shroud skeptic side, the best and most well-known is obviously the 1988 carbon-14 dating. Everybody knows about this. So back in 1988, 3 AMS radiocarbon labs dated a sample from the shroud. And they came out with a date between 1260 to 1390 AD with a claimed 95% degree of certainty. So it would appear game over, right? The shroud's a fake, it's a hoax. Well, not so fast, because there have been a lot of, at least 3 major problems that have come up. So that the first one was known right away. It's the fact that they only dated a single sample location. This is not good science. Originally, they were supposed to take it from 3 different locations. This was something called the Turin Protocol. They didn't follow the protocol. And because of this, Dr. Harry Gove, this is the Richard Dawkins of his day. This is the guy who invented AMS carbon-14 dating. He was an atheist, and he hated Christians and the shroud. And he was in charge of doing the carbon-14 dating of the shroud. Even he admitted the use of a single sample is ill-advised, as it will not generate a reliable date, but will rather give rise to world controversy. We suggest that it would be better not to date the shroud at all. So that's very telling, right there from Harry Gove. The second category of problem is that there have been various empirical data found that suggest the sample chosen is non-representative to the rest of the cloth. So, for example, there has been cotton. Dr. Ray Rogers found that there was cotton interwoven only in that area where they carbon-14 dated. It's not in the rest of the cloth. There have been other things discovered. There's a blue quad mosaic, and it suggests the sample area has a different chemical composition compared to other areas of the cloth. So that's the other one. But here's really the main thing that I would like to stress, because there have been a total of 6 peer-reviewed papers in secular science journals, including this 2017 paper in archaeometry. So that's Oxford Radiocarbon Lab's own journal there. And they did a statistical analysis, and there were various statistical problems. Basically, they proved there's a 98.6% probability that there's some kind of systematic measurement error at play in the carbon-14 dates that they got. So this means they don't have the 95% degree of certainty. And as any statistician will know, this is an international standard. If you don't have 95% degree of confidence, the results are garbage. You can't rely on them. So yeah, here's just kind of a visual of the 3 labs with their plus or minus ranges. You can see none of them overlap, and there's actually a gradient or slope to the results. If you draw a line of best fit, it's a diagonal line. It's not what they assumed, this straight 1260 thing that they published in Nature. So this gives you a slope of about 36 years per centimeter. What the heck does that mean? It means that from the edge of the cloth, as you move inwards towards the center of the cloth, the radiocarbon dates change 36 years. They get 36 years younger for every centimeter you go towards the center of the cloth. And this is just statistically very problematic. It shows there's something systematic bias that's corrupting the dates. So what is that? Well, this is where pro-Shroud proponents come in, and they try to explain the erroneous carbon-14 data. So, there's been about 5 different categories, right? So the first ones, when it first came out, these ones, I admit, they're garbage. They don't work. But at first, we kind of suggested conspiracy theories, like, oh, they must have switched samples in the back rooms, or another guy suggested maybe Russian hackers. This was during the Cold War, so Russian hackers switched the computers or something like that. The second one, a little bit more plausible, but is ordinary contamination. So, things like, there's various things that will affect carbon-14 dating. Tony, I'm not sure where you stand, but you were a young Earth creationist. Are you still?
I still am for now. Yeah.
Awesome. So you will know that there are so many forms of contamination that will affect carbon-14. So, things like on the Shroud, there was talc, there was wax contaminants. It was in a fire in 1532.
Right.
All of these things will corrupt the dates. But unfortunately, there's no way with ordinary contamination to get the Shroud from a 30 AD date to the medieval period. So this alone kind of failed as well. Then there's this is the most popular theory. It's called the invisible reweave hypothesis. So this basically says that in the 1500s, they needed to do a repair. And so they repaired sort of a patchwork into this area of the Shroud. And because of that, when you carbon date it, it will average the material from 1500s and the material from 30 AD, and that will get you a date in the medieval range that they obtained. There's also the carbon monoxide hypothesis. This is an extraordinary form of contamination. It's been tested in 2008, and this has been falsified. So this is not the answer either. But then there's finally the last one, and this is the one I personally go for, called the neutron absorption hypothesis. And this hypothesis was first suggested by a carbon-14 scientist, Dr. Thomas Phillips, in the journal Nature, where they published the results on the Shroud itself. And since then, my friend Bob Rucker, who's a nuclear engineer, has actually done considerable calculations using what's called MCNP software. So that's the Monte Carlo neutron particle software program that the U.S. government uses. So it's top stuff here. So yeah, basically they say a burst of neutrons at the time of Jesus' resurrection affected the carbon-14 dates, making it date younger than it actually is. So yeah, hopefully that's making sense so far in terms of the carbon-14. All right, so Just very quickly, a second piece of evidence is the 1389 Darcy Memorandum. And this is basically a memo that was written in the late 1300s saying that there was an official inquiry into the shroud about 34 years earlier in the 1350s. And during this inquiry, an artist came forward and said, guess what? The shroud's fake. It was paint. It's just an artistic painting. There's nothing to it. Now, there's various problems with this evidence. Basically, this thing is not signed or dated. Historical sources don't mention the memo.
Mhm.
The earliest manuscript copies of them are fragmentary, and there is considerable debate as to what the Latin actually says. For example, was it an artist or was it the artist who confessed? Finally, there's a motivation. Bishop Darcy was in dire financial trouble at the time, so he did have a motivation to lie in order to gain the money from the pilgrims who were going to see the shroud. Instead, they would come to his thing as the Bishop of Troy. But what's most damning, I would say, is we have external documents from the time. None of them mention an official inquiry. None of the, in fact, the person who is said to have held this inquiry says the exact opposite in a letter dated May 28th, 1356. He actually praises Geoffrey's piety and says that he praises, ratifies, and approves of the divine cult going on in the Church of Leary with the Shroud of Turin. So that letter flatly contradicts Darcy's claims.
Right.
All right. So let's switch gears and speed up a little bit. But what is the evidence on the pro-shroud side then? Well, one of the first arguments that comes up is the argument from art history. This basically says, look, the shroud images are not consistent with medieval artistic depictions of Jesus. It's not a medieval artwork. And various experts have studied Byzantine depictions of Jesus in the Christ Pantocrator style. And even non-religious agnostics like Dr. Thomas de Westlow have argued that this form of artistic depiction of Jesus must have been copied using the Shroud of Turin's images. So I have just a 4-minute video clip, if I can just play
Sure.
back.
Sure.
Just to mix things up, make it interesting. All right, so just 4 minutes here. This is Dr. Thomas de Westlow. He's an art historian, and he's an agnostic, not a Christian.
As an art historian, I study imagery from the 13th and 14th century, like the picture you see on the right. Now, if the shroud is a medieval image dating from around this period, art historians like me ought to be able to look at it and study it and tell you who painted it, how they painted it, where it was painted, and so on. But we can't. And the reason is that it's not like any medieval image. Here's one obvious problem. The image you see on the left is the image on the shroud. This is the cloth image. I'm just showing the facial area. Now, it's a very sort of mysterious mask, but it contains an extraordinary secret. Because when you photograph it, and this was done for the first time at the end of the 19th century, you discover that tonally reversed, that odd mask, which is all people would have seen in the Middle Ages, it contains this extraordinary, astonishingly realistic, positive image. It's amazingly realistic, like a photo. Now, this would have been completely beyond anyone painting in the 14th century. I show you on the right, this wonderful painting by Simone Martini. It's an artist I've studied. And it shows you how people were painting the face of Christ in the 14th century. Now, it's very obviously stylized. You can see the brush strokes, you can see the outlines. Unlike the shroud image, which is basically just like a modern photo. Now, here's a second reason why that image on the shroud can't be a medieval image. No one in the Middle Ages knew about negative images. No one knew about negative images until the discovery of photography in the 19th century. And no one in the Middle Ages would have wasted their time, even if they could have done, producing an image like you see on the left that you could only appreciate if you photographed it, and then you could see the true quality of the image, the amazing figure in the middle. So, in my view, it just doesn't make sense as a medieval image. There's another reason as well, and that's that the image is vanishingly faint. It's so faint that if you get closer than about 6 feet away, it melts into the cloth. You can't actually see it. So no one could have produced an image that they couldn't even see that when they were making it. From an art historian's point of view, there's another reason to doubt that this could be a medieval work of art. If you wanted to fake a holy shroud in the Middle Ages, you didn't need to create a forgery so brilliant that scholars like me and scientists working in the 21st century would be fooled by it. All you needed to do was to paint one. And what I've got on the right of the screen there is the Holy Shroud of Besançon. It's actually an accurate copy of it because it was destroyed in the French Revolution. Now, this was very obviously just a medieval painting. You can see how stylized it is. But until it was destroyed, this shroud was thought to be an authentic relic of Christ's burial. This image was thought to be a miraculous imprint. So you didn't need to forge the perfect forgery in the Middle Ages. People were gullible in those days, especially when it came to religious relics.
All right, so that's it for the video clip there. I think you guys get the point. And again, this is a professional art historian who's an agnostic, not a Christian here. Another second related argument is the argument from numismatics, fancy word for coins. And there have been various experts on Byzantine coins, such as Justin Robinson, who's a fellow of the Royal and British Numismatic Societies. And he's actually published in a peer-reviewed journal, I think called Coin News, that he studied various Byzantine fullis coins dating to the year 1028 AD. And he says that these coins also copied the Shroud of Turin's facial image to imprint on the coins. And a similar argument was with the Justinian gold solidus coins, dating back to 692 AD there. All right, and there's an example of the gold solidus coins. You can see the bloodstains just happen to correspond to the tufts of hair on this gold coin here. So yeah. Okay, so another very important piece of evidence is the Sudarium of Oviedo. So this is the purported headcloth of Jesus mentioned in the Gospel of John. And what's incredible is that forensic professionals have studied the cloths and the bloodstains and body fluids on both cloths, the Shroud of Turin and the Sudarium, and they've proven that there is a forensic link. So one of my friends is Caesar Barta, who I had on my show, and he's actually done experimental studies and simulations via computer analysis. And he actually proved there's a high percentage, he estimates about 75% degree of correspondence for the crown of thorn wounds on both cloths. And this suggests that they obviously covered the same bloodied head or corpse. There's also an amazing exact identity, same anatomical proportions. So the nose, the mouth, the beard, even some of the swellings, like on the right cheek, all correspond on both cloths. In 2016, there was a morphological study saying, quote unquote, it's unquestionable that the sources of these points from which the blood began to flow correspond entirely. And then in 2015, there was an X-ray fluorescence study which discovered a unique concentration of limestone dust right on the tip of the nose on both cloths. So here's just, you can see that visually here in terms of the matching the blood stains together and the anatomical features. There's even an interesting thing where the epsilon wound is, there's a little dot of blood on the Shroud of Turin, but it has a hole in it. And what people studying the Sudarium have said is they can find the little missing donut hole of blood on that cloth that corresponds to this kind of donut bloodstain here. And here's the X-ray fluorescence study showing the large, unique spike in the limestone dust on the tip of the nose that happens to correspond. All right, so almost done. Believe it or not, there are actually scientific ways of dating the shroud as well. So Ray Rogers, back in 2005, he did a comparison of the vanillin, and he compared that to Dead Sea Scrolls, and he actually proved that they seem to be comparable. So this was a microchemical test suggesting a first century origin for the Shroud of Turin. More recently, Giulio Fonte has conducted a total of 4 physical tests, again, all dating the shroud back to the 1st century AD. So the first one was the Fourier transform infrared, which yielded a date 300 BC plus or minus 400 years. Raman spectroscopy gave a date of 200 BC plus or minus 500 years. Mechanical tensile strength, so that's how strong the fibers were, gave a date of 400 AD plus or minus 400 years. And then here's the thing that's been making all the headlines recently. Basically, there was a 2022 peer-reviewed paper in the Heritage Science Journal where they did a wide-angle X-ray scattering technique. And again, they dated the shroud to the 1st century AD. So when you combine all these dating methods together, you get a cumulative date of 33 BC plus or minus 250 years with that required 95% degree of certainty. So the cumulative effect of these dating techniques is incredible. Here's just the visual representation of how all the methods came out with the results. And again, the only century that these different dating techniques overlap is the 1st century. So there's the peer-reviewed paper on the X-ray dating, and you can see this is the raw data itself. The orange line is the Shroud of Turin, and the green line is a sample dating to 65 AD from Masada, and they're almost overlapping completely. Yeah. And the important part about this is you'll see skeptics online, David Falk and that, and they'll say, oh, well, these pro-shroud guys are biased. They're kind of fudging the data to get the results they want. This part that I'm showing you right here, there's no interpretation. This is the raw data from the instrument, from the wax itself. So yeah. All right. And last but not least, and I'm coming to an end, there are possible biblical references to the shroud images as well. Now, this is very controversial, so I'll be curious to see what Tony makes of it. But a friend of mine, Larry Stolley, has been arguing that there are about 7 texts in the New Testament which he says are cryptic references to the shroud images. Now, I myself tend to be very skeptical of these, but I think the best one that perhaps convinces me is the Galatians 3:1. And that's a text that says, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth? For it was before your very eyes that Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified." And the Greek word there for portrayed, it's the same word that's used for a public portrayal, like a public notice being placed in the public square. And it's not a metaphorical interpretation, which has been the traditional view of biblical commentators, including Dr. Ben Witherington, who I had on my show debating Larry. Mm-hmm. And even Ben himself admitted, I was wrong. This is not, Larry is correct, that whatever this verse is talking about, they must be seeing something, a literal object with their physical eyes. You can't interpret this metaphorically. So even Ben has come that far. Now it's a question, what is that? Larry would say, well, they're seeing the shroud images. They're lifting up the shroud and showing them images. Whereas Ben would say, no, I think Paul's showing them the stigmata mentioned in Galatians 6. So there's debate to be had there, but we have progressed towards the shroud. So yeah, that's kind of my summary on the shroud history there. So
okay, now you have a part on the scientific as well. Or is that
I do, yeah. But did you want to break it up?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we can do is if anyone has any questions at this point for the historical data that Dale has presented to us, if you can put a Q in front of your comment and add your question. So put a Q in the chat and just add your question. I just wanted to, let me see here, just wanted to thank Seek the Cross. Thank you for that super chat. I really appreciate that. He says, Lord bless the ministry. Thanks for the edification through the live stream. My pleasure, brother. Thank you. So, folks, if you do have any questions, please do bring those up. Someone brought this up, Dale, and again, there's, as you know, there's a lot of miracle claims in the Roman Catholic Church as well, even in the Eastern Orthodox as well, and Abad TV is saying why miracles are happening in the Catholic Church: incorruptible saint relics, Padre Pio's stigmata, Medjugorje, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Eucharistic miracles. When there's an exorcism, they call a priest. So maybe you can. I don't know if this has ever been brought to your attention, Dale, that a lot of folks would say, well, I mean, the shroud is no different than these stigmata that Padre Pio had on his hands, and then they'll bring up other miracles, the Marian apparitions and so forth. So how would you distinguish the shroud research from these other Roman Catholic claims?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know all of these examples, for example, but I have studied and brought on experts for some of these, like Our Lady of Guadalupe, Eucharistic miracles. I've had some experts on both sides there. So the first thing you have to ask is, well, okay, can we actually prove the facts on the ground? And right. I find that there is a significant difference between some of these Eucharistic miracles, for example, and shroud studies. So one point, when we go to the science, the question of peer review with shroud studies, it was published in journals like the Canadian Journal of Forensics, Applied Optics, Thermochemica Acta. These, even the Richard Dawkins would admit, these are quality science, secular science journals, where there's a lot more questions about the facts on the ground with things like Eucharistic miracles or, Our Lady of Guadalupe and stuff. Beyond that, too, just as a philosopher, I would want to ask, even if we accept the facts that there are some miraculous happening. So, for example, I actually do think there are some bona fide cases of miracle healings at the site Lourdes. Okay, so if there was a supernatural healing, is that authenticating Catholicism? Not necessarily, right? You have to establish that that miracle is actually a miracle authenticating Catholicism as opposed to a miracle of compassion. Or something, because atheists are healed there.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of people. Protestants are healed there. So, yeah, I would be very skeptical in terms of using these as proofs for Catholicism. And in a lot of the cases, the evidence just doesn't match what we have with the shroud at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you as well. Even the whole question of incorruptibility. I mean, a lot of research has shown that these corpses of so-called saints have been worked over, they've added wax and so forth to the face. And there's been a lot of controversy over Padre Pio's stigmata, some even arguing so far as to say that he used acid on his hands to mimic this idea of stigmata. But what is interesting, I think you'll mention this, Dale, is that he had them on the palms of his hands, whereas when we look at the shroud, the nail prints are not in the hands; it's actually in the wrists. So we can talk about that. The appearances at Medjugorje, they've been even questioned by Roman Catholics. Some apologists have even called it demonic. There's also controversy about Guadalupe, that the whole thing was made up. And these are coming from Roman Catholic scholars, not atheistic or Protestant scholars and so forth. So I think you're right that even when Jesus healed people, like when he healed the leper in Matthew 8, he said, "Go show yourself to the priest," as a confirmation. And so he did not shy away from external confirmation to show that yes, this person had leprosy and now they do not, and we could verify that the same way a doctor can verify whether you've been healed of cancer. Scientific tests can show yes, there was cancer in the body. Now the body is free of cancer. So I agree with you that there's an old saying that old truth is God's truth, and so if something could be shown scientifically to be verifiable, whether it's a healing or whatever it may be, we have to look at the evidence. And this is why I appreciate you coming on, Dale, because a lot of Protestant Christians would look at this and say, well, is this leaning towards idolatry? And could this be a fake to lead people astray and so forth? And all we're doing is, like you've just shown here in your presentation, is we're looking at the evidence and we're saying, okay, what do we do with this? Raw data. What do we do with this? So, if we follow the one who claimed to be the truth, then truth should matter to us. And therefore, we shouldn't shy away from these questions.
Exactly. Yeah, just look, at the end of the day, what is it the shroud images attest to, right? It doesn't attest to Catholicism. The Catholic Church doesn't even officially accept this. Yes. If you want to go down that route, the Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslims in 2010 has officially accepted the shroud as authentic. So I guess it's authenticating Islam then? No, that's not the proper way to be. It authenticates Jesus's death and implies his resurrection from the dead. That's all the shroud images show. So
right. Yeah. Okay, so just want to make sure again, if there's anyone in here who, let me see here. There's how detailed and exact Dale Glover is in his brilliant summary. What a great presentation. Thanks, Dale and Tony. You're very welcome, Annette. Very, very welcome.
Good to see you again, Annette.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for joining us, Annette. And let me see if there's any other comments here. All right. I don't really see any. Okay. So, folks, if you don't have any questions on this, then did you want to discuss the scientific part, Dale?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I will bring up.
Okay. Right. So in the meantime, folks, if you do have any questions, post them in the chat. Go ahead, Dale.
All right. Just let me know when it's.
Yep, I think I see it there.
Okay, Shroud in Science.
Okay,
so when it comes to the scientific evidence, again, this is the part that's my bread and butter that I really like the best, is this question of, are the shroud images miraculously authentic? Does it actually authenticate the resurrection? And on that front, I've invented my own sort of approach that's similar to Gary Habermas's minimal facts approach. So I call it the minimal relevant features approach to studying the Shroud of Turin. And basically, the MRFs refer to the various physical and chemical properties of the shroud's body and bloodstain images that were.
Is it on the screen, Dale? Is it on the screen? I don't.
You're not seeing that?
No. Let me add it. Let me see if I can add it. Okay. How's that?
So I'm just seeing my slide because I'm sharing my screen. I can just see my slide. So
okay.
Is that on your screen?
Yes, this is on the screen here.
Okay, cool. So yeah, everyone, and just let Tony know in the chat if you're not seeing my slides. Let him know.
Let me know.
All right. So basically, in order to qualify as a minimal relevant feature, I have two criteria, exact same as Gary Habermas with the historical evidence, right? So number one, the feature must be highly evidenced and substantiated in credible peer-reviewed science literature. And we have a wealth of information on that front because of the STIRP papers. We've got at least 26 secular peer-reviewed science journals attesting to the facts that I'll be using. Secondly, the scholarly consensus criteria. So I'm a little less strict than Gary is with his minimal facts, but I consider if there's 2/3 of informed experts accept the feature as a proven fact and it's highly evidenced, that qualifies you as a minimal relevant feature that I think you have to explain. Okay, so what are some of these minimal relevant features? And I have an Excel document where I list all of them, but just to keep things simple, I've listed 5 of them here for you guys. So The first is that there's a photonegativity, and this was the first feature ever discovered about the shroud back in 1898. It basically says that the lights and darks are reversed. So you can see this was the photo taken first discovered by Secondo Pia, and then confirmed in 1931 by the Henri photo that we're looking at here, where it's much clearer, much more realistic, where you're looking at Jesus. But this is called the true photopositive image that we're looking at on the negative. There's also body image uniformity. So this means that each individual fiber that's colored, it's colored individually, right? There's no like brushstrokes across fibers and stuff like that. And they're colored with the exact same plus or minus 2% intensity of color. So the color is like a straw yellow, right?
Right.
Whatever the intensity or darkness of that color, it's the same on each individual fiber that's colored. So that's what we mean by uniformity there.
Right.
That makes sense. All right. Then we have the three-dimensional information. Everybody knows about this. This was discovered in 1976 by Dr. John Jackson and others. And it shows that basically there's topographical information contained within the lights and darks of the shroud's images. So you can see it corresponds. Here's the frontal image, as does the dorsal image as well. You've got the face up here, as well as the body and the crossed arms. So there's, for lack of a better way of saying it, there's a three-dimensional quality. There's 3D information contained within the shroud images. And this was something that was very remarkable and which led to STIRP taking place in person back in 1978. Now, this one's a bit of a difficult, but it's incredibly important. This is called the vertical mapping of the images. So you can see here, so here's Jesus, here's his nose, right? He's lying down. He has the shroud cloth kind of laying naturally draped over top of him, let's say. Whatever caused the images on the shroud, it followed path P. It traveled from the body to the cloth and colored the cloth in a straight vertical line, right? So straight up path P. And this is important because when you have other mechanisms, so let's say it was through direct contact, you pressed the cloth down to touch the nose to create the images from sweat. Well, that wouldn't give you path P. You would get path A, the absorption path, right? So the images would be wider. And this is well known. It's called the Mask of Agamemnon, or the wraparound distortion effect, where lateral distortions cause the image to be wider than it should be. And if you posit that it was gas, so this would be path E, the emissions path, it's even worse. And yeah, I should have had a picture of the Mask of Agamemnon to show you. I'll show you later on. But basically, yeah. Then there's also body image superficiality. And it's important to note that there are 3 layers of superficiality. So the first is on a macroscopic level. That's easy to replicate. It just means the shroud's on one side. Images are on one side of the cloth. They don't soak right through and show up on the back of the cloth. But then there's the thread level superficiality, which means only the top 2 to 3, or in some cases, at the most, 3 to 4 of the top fibers of each thread are colored. So that's incredibly superficial because each thread has about 200 fibers within it. And each fiber has the diameter of a human hair or less. And then there's finally the fiber level superficiality, which is depicted here, where the color, it doesn't penetrate even the fibers. Remember that this is the diameter of a human hair, and the color's just on the outer surface or the primary cell wall. STIRP even measured it. It's about 200 nanometers or something like that. So incredibly superficial. So these are some of the remarkable physical and chemical properties found on the shroud. And we use these to then go to the next level. Well, what are the explanations for these? How could these images have formed? And in shroud research, there are three types of explanation. So the first is you can have an ordinary artistic explanation, right? So we'll look at some of those. Traditional painting would be one of them. Then there are ordinary naturalistic mechanisms. So this is ones where you have a dead body, perhaps even Jesus, covered in the shroud, but the laws of nature alone, through direct contact or gas emissions, they cause the images to show up on the shroud. And then finally, there are the extraordinary or supernatural mechanisms, which are obviously that's the one I go for and I argue for and stuff like that, right? So here's just kind of a breakdown, just giving you a visual of the various ordinary artistic mechanisms, some of the ordinary naturalistic ones, and some of the miraculous theories that have been suggested, to just give you a quick visual. But let's take a look at some of these. So let's start with the traditional painting hypothesis, that this was the very first shroud skeptical explanation for the images, right? Dating back, remember, 1389 with Darcy. And with this, back in 1978, an atheist named Walter Macron, he actually got a chance to study some of the shroud samples taken from the STIRP project. And he used his polarized light microscope, and he claimed, guess what? It's game over. This is a painting. I discovered the red ochre or iron oxide pigments. And his team later on claimed to find vermilion red pigment on one of the blood stains as well. So that he posited, see, that's proof. These images are composed of paint, and it's a traditional painting. Someone painted it with a paintbrush. Well, how does that do in terms of our minimal relevant features? Does this explanation hold up? No, it's been an utter disaster. So in the first place, as you can see in red, it fails all 4 out of the 5 features that I gave you guys. It can't create uniform. Sorry?
Yes, I agree.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it can't create uniform images. Human beings just don't have the hand-eye brain coordination necessary to do that with a brush. And there was Stirp, Dr. Jackson and Erkeline and Jumper conducted an experiment with certified forensic artists to try and duplicate the vertical mapping and the 3-dimensionality. So they even cheated, right? Because they were able to check their work, and they gave them certain anchor points to help them duplicate these features. In all cases, utter failure. They found it was just impossible because of a combination of limited visual discernment of shading at low contrast and inadequate motor coordination for applying the correct shading values. So it just doesn't work, and it fails the superficiality as well. And even on the negativity, it's very questionable. I'm being very charitable to the shroud skeptic and calling it questionable instead of a failure here. But how would a medieval artist anticipate modern camera technology and purposefully paint the images, reversing the lights and darks so that when we gain cameras in the 1800s, we would see the remarkable black and white images that we see as the true? Yeah, that just doesn't make sense.
Right.
The other main issue here is that Macron was wrong. Look, Stirp studied all the samples that he did, plus the rest of them. And there is no paint. The images are not composed of paint. They are literally oxidized cellulose. So, when your newspaper turns yellow when left out in the sun, that's oxidized cellulose. That's what the shroud images are made of. And Stirp tested the cloth for all known organic and inorganic pigments, paints, and dyes. They didn't find any evidence for this. This included dozens of spectral tests. Macron didn't do spectral tests, including X-ray fluorescence, which would have 100% picked up the iron oxide red ochre pigment that he said the shroud images were made of. Guess what? Nothing. It's not there. They also conducted all of the same microchemical and physical tests that Macron did, plus their own, including what's called a proteases test. And I bring up the proteases test because that is the absolute falsification that there's paint on here, because the proteases test is a test that allows you to see if there are proteins present in the body images. Proteins are necessary because that would be used as part of the binder that the pigment is in, the gelatin binder.
Yeah.
The pigments have to be in. There's no proteins on the shroud in those body images. There are proteins in the blood stains, which, of course, we would expect that, because human blood, we have proteins in our human blood. So that corresponds. But again, with Macron, here's another thing. With that peer-reviewed publishing, he published his results in the journal Microscope. That is a respectable journal. But here's the problem. It's not peer-reviewed because Macron was the editor of that journal. Of course he was, of course he published those papers of his. He was the one who decided. So that's totally opposite to Stirp, where they had no connection with the journals they were publishing in. That's kind of that. How am I doing with time? Should I?
You're doing very well. Very good.
Awesome. Okay, so in that case, here's another artistic mechanism. This one is very different. It's by a friend of mine, actually, Nicholas Allen, and it's called the proto-photo hypothesis. So Nicholas Allen, he's a South African professor, and he proposed this as sort of a camera obscura method. He thinks that the Shroud of Turin is literally the first photograph taken in human history. And what he did, he used a life-size sculpture of a human body. He hung it up by a contraption out in the sun, and he focused the sunlight to go through a hole. And actually, I can show you here. So here's so the sunlight would bounce off the statue, and it would go through a little hole in the wall, which is the camera obscura. And he would have set up the Shroud of Turin, which is acting like a film, because he would emulse the shroud in silver nitrate and silver compounds, which made it sensitive to light. In fact, that's how film works, right? It's dunked in silver, and that makes it sensitive to light so that it will create the images from sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically set up this little camera obscura method. And he says that's how the Shroud of Turin was created. Well, so here's the photo negatives. Here's the Shroud of Turin. Here are his results by comparison. And as you can see, there are some fundamental problematic differences. So in the first place, here's the three-dimensionality. You don't get true three-dimensional images. The mouth is sunken in here horribly. The forehead is horribly sunken in. The hair is uplifted. So this is in no way comparable to the true three-dimensionality displayed on the Shroud of Turin. Obviously, because it fails the three-dimensionality, you're not going to get vertical mapping, because think about how this method works, right? The cloth is held up vertically, and the body is held up vertically, and the sunlight beams down on it directionally and then bounces off to go onto the cloth. So by definition, it's impossible to replicate vertical mapping that we see on the shroud. Superficiality, think about it. In order to get the shroud photosensitive, he's got to dunk this thing in silver salt, various silver salts. Well, that means that emulsion is going to penetrate right through the cloth. And there's going to be evidence of capillary action all over the place. So it's going to fail there. It does pass the negativity aspect, as we saw. It gives us a negative image, although some would say that the quality is almost too good relative to the shroud. This technique produces images that are too highly resolved relative to the shroud. So that's a difference there. But look at body image uniformity. Do you see these white spots? And this is because this is the direction of the sun gleaming on that part of the arm, or gleaming right on the tops of the feet. And it creates these white spots. This is not a uniformly colored image. And you get little black holes here and up here. So the shroud is uniformly colored all throughout. So yeah, you can see why this mechanism fails there. Okay. All right. Well, what about trying a naturalistic a naturalistic explanation, such as gas diffusion. Dr. Ray Rogers, he was a member of STIRP and a Christian, and he thought that, well, there's nothing supernatural about the shroud images. Maybe they were explained through gas diffusion. Jesus was wrapped in his shroud, and certain gases emitted from his body as he decomposed, and it left behind the images. And in fact, science does tell us that certain compounds, when we're lying on a sheet, it can create stains on linen sheets. Just go to a hospital and you can see stains on beds.
Mm-hmm.
So he proposed what's called a Maillard reaction, chemical reaction. So a Maillard chemical reaction, it's known as caramelization, right? It's like a little browning, a caramelling of the thing, right? So there are amines in our body, and that would be generated by a decomposing corpse. And then this would interact chemically with, he supposed there was a thin starch contamination layer on the shroud fibers. So this is how he tries to explain why it's superficial. There wasn't starch further in the cloth. And these reacted together to create this light straw brown coloring that we see. Okay, so basically, how would we evaluate that? So I think on this front, again, this is me being super generous to the skeptic here, and he does get negativity, no doubt about that. And I'm going to grant him superficiality, but just understand there are very serious problems and questions with this. So I'm not even sure it's consistent here, but if you just grant him everything he wants about this supposed thin starch layer, which there is no proof for on the shroud itself, it would achieve this result. But in terms of the three-dimensionality and the vertical mapping, absolutely not. Because remember what I said before when I was talking about vertical mapping, remember path E, where you get that wide, gas diffusion would diffuse in all directions, and you would get these very blurry, very diffuse images that are much wider than what we see with the shroud. And once you get that, and also a diffusing gas model would have no means of conveying topographical or three-dimensional information, right? Gases don't flow differently from the tip of your nose compared to your cheeks or something like that. It would just we would get a grossly distorted, blurry result, kind of thing. So yeah, all right. So I'm almost at the done here, but I just wanted to mention a couple of, what are some of the supernatural or extraordinary explanations then? And one of the first ones was from the physicist, Dr. John Jackson, and he liked to apply to ultraviolet radiation as his hypothesis. So he says, at the time of Jesus' resurrection, the body became, fancy word, volumetrically radiant. So just means it's radiant throughout its entire volume. And this ultraviolet radiation burst out from the body and then created the images onto the cloth, to keep it in a nutshell and keep it simple. Now, there are different radiation hypotheses because John Jackson supposed that there was a cloth collapse. So when the body disappeared from the shroud, became what's called mechanically transparent, the cloth, it's not like the radiation burst up from the body to the cloth. It's rather the body disappeared, leaving behind this radiation, and then the cloth was sucked into the radiation, creating the images. Now that has become very controversial in modern times. And because of that, my friend Bob Rucker, who's come up with the vertically collimated radiation burst, says that no, actually there was no cloth collapse. It was, again, that the body, the radiation went from the body or within the body to the cloth type thing. And he gives a very detailed hypothesis as to the cause and effect sequences there. As you can see on your screen, he goes into exquisite detail. Again, he is a nuclear engineer, so this is his specialization. But yeah, how do these radiation hypotheses do? As you can see, they explain everything. They do create negative images. They would create uniform images because the radiation operates uniformly on all fibers that it interacts with. It would also create the three-dimensionality radiation, more radiation from the tip of the nose versus other areas. And the vertical mapping. So here's one thing I'll say, that in terms of radiation, it is true that naturally speaking, radiation radiates in all directions, just like a gas, right? So this is something that may be said to be an ad hoc component, but pro-shroud proponents say that no, we're supposing that the miracle, the work of God, is that he only created vertically collimated radiation. So that's why we don't get the lateral distortion from radiation diffusing out in all directions equally. And finally, it would create superficiality on the tips of the surface. The proton radiation specifically, which is what Bob Rucker supposes, would only engage with the top superficial areas in the primary cell wall on the fibrils. So it all gets a green light in terms of these radiation theories, and it can explain all these features. So yeah, here's my last slide. So if I were to turn this into an argument, a philosophical argument, how would I do that? Well, I'm going to copy Dr. William Lane Craig here a little bit and his teleological argument. So I can do this. Premise one, either the shroud images were formed by natural mechanisms and regularities, random chance, or intelligent design. The shroud images were not formed through natural regularities, right? We tested that above. And obviously it's not due to random chance. I don't think anyone would, we can easily falsify that if we need to. So therefore, 3, if the shroud images were formed by intelligent design, then the designer, random chance or intelligent design. Premise 2, the shroud images were not formed through natural regularities or random chance. And then premise 3, if the shroud images were formed by intelligent design, then who was that designer? Well, it was either a human artist or it was God. And therefore, from 4, the shroud images were not designed by a human artist. Therefore, God designed the shroud images. So that would be, in a nutshell, my kind of argument there. So that's it.
Wow. Well, that's great. I mean, I'm just surprised, Dale, at the way you're able to just take all that information and just bring it into a capsule form there. So that's fantastic.
Awesome.
And that was an amazing presentation. Wow, that really was good data there that you presented. So folks, as I said, we're going to take some questions. So now's your time. If you have any questions, everything you want to know about the shroud, but we're afraid to ask, this is your time. And so I'm just going to pick up some questions here for us, Dale. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you, because I don't think I've ever asked this of you. Yeah. But what is your own position on the shroud? Are you pro shroud? Are you neutral, skeptical?
I wouldn't say I'm 100% there yet, but everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard from Gary Habermas and others, and including your presentation, I'm beginning to lean towards the probability that this is the Shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. I remember that study in 1980 in the 80s where they said, "Oh no, it's a medieval forgery. It comes from the medieval period." I still remember. I remember the place I was. I remember I was at the University of Toronto and I was reading. I think it was not Newsweek or Time, and that report appeared in there. And at the time, I thought, wow, well, I guess that settles that. And I was not aware of the later studies that took place. So, and again, I'm not leaning towards this because it has nothing to do with whether I'm against. I don't see this as a form of venerating images or anything like that. I think it's just a matter of fact. It's something that happened in time, and I've been convinced that whatever put that image on the shroud, I think that was something akin to radiation. And the only thing I can think of is this, Dale, is that when I look at the New Testament evidence in the Gospels, we are told in the Gospel of John that when when Peter and John raced over to the tomb on that first Easter Sunday morning, and John outran him, which would indicate, I guess, Peter had, added the pounds on, if you know what I'm saying. John got there first. They both ran, and John got there first. And it says that he looked in, and he saw that the shroud had the word in Greek there. It means that it was like a chrysalis, that a caterpillar, when it cocoons itself, and then when it leaves, it just leaves this sunken in chrysalis. And the way that it describes it in the Gospel of John is that the grave cloths or the shroud was not disturbed. It was simply sunken in, which would indicate that the body of Jesus, considering the power of resurrection and what a resurrection body is like, the body of Jesus went through the cloth. He didn't have to get up and disentangle himself or, unroll himself. He went through the cloth. And so I think that resurrection power, that moment when he was resurrected, and he simply went through the cloth, just the same way he could appear with the doors being closed, he could appear and disappear at will. I think that image, the most plausible explanation, is, as you said, was that this was the power of the resurrection. That's the only thing I can think of that would explain it, because the way the Gospels presented is that the shroud was undisturbed. It was simply sunken in, like the body was in there and then it left. It was taken out.
That's in the original Greek.
The original Greek implies that the grave cloths were undisturbed and that they were simply sunken in. They were hollowed out, if you will.
That's awesome.
And so that's the only thing I can think of, is that resurrection power. If it's akin to what we call radiation, then that would explain the imprint. And also what also I think convinced me as well was that it is nothing like the artwork that we see on the crucifixion. In the crucifixion, for example, the nails are through the palms in the pictures that we have, but in the shroud, it's through the wrist. And the other thing too is the blood marks on the head. In the traditional pictures of the crucifixion, Christ has a crown of thorns. It's more like a wreath going around his head.
Yeah.
Whereas the shroud indicates that there were blood marks on the top of the head as well, not just on the brow, but on the top of the head. And so this would indicate that the crown of thorns was more like a cap. Think of a cap of thorns that was shoved down on his head. And so it was more like, that would be more like a crown that we think of a king having a crown. The crown around the head, that's more like a wreath. The New Testament uses two Greek words for crown. It uses the word Stephanos, which is something like a garland that Olympic athletes would be given when they would win the race.
Laurels.
Yeah, and then the other word is the Greek word diademos, which we get the word diadem, and a diadem is a metal crown, and that usually covers the whole head. Think of the British monarch when he was coronated. It's a full crown. And so the crown of thorns, I don't think was a wreath-like crown. I have one here, if you don't mind me just showing you, Dale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something like this. This is the way we think of a crown of thorns. It was simply placed on the head, and it just cut through the brow and the side. But it was more like a cap. So when I look at the shroud, it bears various features that I think would be unknown to a medieval artist, and it speaks of, let's just say that we find things on the shroud that are dissimilar. The criterion of dissimilarity that historians usually use, which are signs of authenticity, that this is not made up. So it's things like that has really moved me towards the belief that I think what we may have here is the actual cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. And that doesn't mean, and you're not advocating for this, and I'm not saying let us go and touch it so we can gain special powers or indulgences or merit of some sort. We're not saying that at all. But what we're saying is that we may have something here that is a bona fide example of the reality of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. There's
Yeah, non Galatians 3:1. I mean, I'll have to look at it again, but again, I've never really looked at it. I mean, many of our friends in the Eastern Orthodox tradition believe that Paul is presenting there an icon, that he showed them an icon of Jesus.
Yeah.
And, and they also believe that Luke was the first to draw an icon of the Virgin Mary. And that has even been dismissed by an Orthodox scholar who's actually written on this, has actually said that this is pure legendary material. This does not go back to St. Luke. But anyway, the point being that when we look at the raw data, as you've been pointing out, I think that it's enough to convince even agnostics that they may not believe in God, but they would say there's something here that cannot be explained by medieval art or the history of the time.
Yeah, I'm just to attest to that. Like, I'm personal friends with a guy named John Loken. He is an agnostic. He doesn't believe in God. He certainly doesn't believe in Christianity. He's right. Yeah. He's written an entire book discrediting the resurrection, but he is pro Shroud. He thinks that the evidence is incredible evidence that something happened, and that he definitely thinks it belonged to the historical Jesus. So
yeah. Definitely. Just want to thank Annette. Thank you for your super chat sticker there, Annette. Really appreciate that. We have a question here, Dale. Let me see. We have a question. If laser tests can't be replicated to show the imprint of our Lord, to give an example to a non-believer, what example of light that would be used to describe the light used, for example, 10 times the sun? I don't know if you follow the question.
Okay, so Paulo de Lazaro has done experiments, right? He believes in the ultraviolet radiation hypothesis, and he's done scientific experiments proving that if something like this had occurred, it would create and reproduce images like we see with the Shroud, oxidized cellulose, and have all the various features. Now, the only sticking point for his was the issue of superficiality. So he's working on trying to get the burst to last just like a fraction of a second so that it will reproduce the superficiality. But just to try so if laser tests can't be replicated to show, so to give an example to a non-believer, what example of light would I use? Okay, so here's what I would say. So I wouldn't appeal to light at all. So, back in the 1970s when STIRP first came out, the original hypothesis is that it was a visible white light, right? Because, doesn't that look great? A burst of light from Jesus at the moment of the resurrection. Like, that's for the Hallmark Channel right there. But the problem is the images attenuate after 4 centimeters. So after 4 centimeters, no imaging takes place. And light does not attenuate within 4 centimeters. So what I would say, rather than looking at ultraviolet radiation or some kind of electromagnetic form of radiation, I like Bob Rucker's approach of particle radiation, and specifically protons does not have this issue of superficiality that the laser tests or ultraviolet radiation would. So that's I go a different route entirely with particle radiation.
Okay. A question from Annette here. Why are the side 1532 burn marks in 3D on the VP image of Jackson?
Yes. So the way the VP8 image analyzer works is that it's based on the lights or density, right? So the lights and darknesses, how dark is something. So obviously those scorch marks are extremely dark, and because of that, it translates as it's closer towards the person, right? So it elevates them, and that's why they're so prominent, stuff like that. So it's based on the lights and darknesses, and that it translates that into topographical information, and that's why that comes out.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. Let me see here. These are more of a comment, Dale. We have some Jeremy Johansson. Here's why the 3D information is so important. If it were a fraud, the artist would need the computer-generated 3D model first to place the pixelated image accurately on the clock.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I think even the skeptics at this point admit that it would just be impossible for some kind of artist in the 14th century, or heck, even today, for an artist to purposefully recreate the shroud's three-dimensional information as we have it.
Yeah.
So what most skeptics try to do is they say, oh, well, it was an accidental byproduct. You know, if you use some kind of 3D object like a bas relief or a sculpture, that inevitably there will be some three-dimensional information encoded into the image. And that's true. But the problem is, even when you use these devices, it doesn't work. It doesn't reproduce the three-dimensionality we have with the shroud. There are always those lateral distortions. And in fact, a shroud skeptic named Cicero Mores, he just proved this in a peer-reviewed journal using computer-generated models, where he tested a bas relief, and guess what? It wasn't vertically mapped like the shroud. There were slight lateral distortions, which may prove that they weren't vertically mapped, and because of that, there were three-dimensional distortions as well.
Right. Now, the figure on the shroud is also naked. Is he not? He's naked.
He is.
Yeah. That's another thing I was going to raise as well, Dale, is that in the depictions of the crucifixion, Jesus is always presented with a loincloth around his thighs. And so it doesn't matter if it's a sculpture, if it's a painting, you always have his thighs covered by a loincloth. Whereas we know that the Romans did crucify their victims naked
Right.
to heap shame and insult on them. And so the person on the shroud clearly shows lacerated marks on the buttocks, on the legs, the forelegs, etc., the chest, the arms, and so on. So that is another thing, is that even the depictions of the burial of Christ, if you look at any artistic rendering of the burial of Christ, he is buried with the loincloth. But the Romans clearly crucified the victims naked. And so this is another piece of evidence that struck me, is that the person in that shroud his privates are not covered. I mean, his hands are covering his private parts. But that to me is just one of those dissimilarities again that do not cohere with what we see in medieval art.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was just about to say, that there are some depictions of Jesus naked later on, but up to the medieval period,
yes,
heck no, right?
Yeah.
So one of the amazing in terms of the art history argument, we have this thing called the Hungarian Prey Codex, and I had this originally on my presentation. I removed it just so we had time, but
sure.
It basically depicts Jesus naked. And this is totally unique. Everything else, as Tony says, has his modesty intact with a loincloth, or, you know, they wouldn't dare depict him naked. And this dates to about 1192, this manuscript where it's depicting Jesus naked. And this is one of the main reasons why even that agnostic art historian, Thomas de Westlow, is saying, no, this guy, whoever made this, he's breaching all protocol, all past precedent, and he's depicting Jesus naked, which is a kind of disrespectful act. The only reason he could be doing that is because he must be copying what he thinks is an authoritative image, which does have Jesus naked. Right. The only thing we know of is the Shroud of Turin that does that.
Very much so. Okay, we have another question here. This is from Helio56. Could they use a technique similar to Gaiotaku, which is a way to take an impression of 3D objects? Not sure if you're familiar with that, Dale.
Gaiotaku, no, but I am familiar with various techniques, artistic techniques, right? So Luigi Garlascelli or my friend, the skeptic Hugh Ferry, they all use these kind of 3D or semi-3D objects, like a bas relief, a shallow bas relief, to try and replicate the three-dimensionality of the shroud. But as I said, the problem is, let's look at the results. And when we do get the results and test them, it doesn't replicate the shroud's three-dimensionality nor the strict straight line vertical mapping. There's always some kind of distortion and that sort of thing. So even using 3D objects, it doesn't work. You do get some three-dimensional info, but it's not a duplicate of the Shroud.
Right. I found it strange. You said that you mentioned that an Ahmadiyya Muslim was convinced that the shroud was that of Jesus.
Not just all its official doctrine. The Caliph of the Ahmadiyya Muslims in 2010 officially accepted the Shroud. Now they say it's proof of the swoon theory.
Yeah,
and that Thomas took the Shroud to India and all this stuff. But it's every Ahmadiyya Muslim in the world is bound. They have to believe it, that the Shroud is authentic to Jesus.
Right. Okay. We have an interesting question here by Jeffrey Mullicky. Why does humanity insist on testing supernatural things with physical science? I think it's more of a philosophical question. Yeah.
And I'm a philosopher, so I love that. Yeah. So I don't think it's so much that we insist on it, but I mean, why not do it, right? I mean, God created the laws of nature, and he can obviously look, all of his miracles at some point interact with natural laws, right? So the virgin conception was a supernatural act, but then the birth was normal and natural, and the pregnancy was normal and natural. So I don't see any problem. Why not look to see how did God do it? Is there a way we can detect through physical science how God did something? Now, if it turns out we can't, like I have no idea how God turned water into wine. Did he stir the molecules, or was it just a basic, what philosophers call a basic action, where he just did it and it was instantly transformed? It doesn't matter to me either way. It's a supernatural miracle, but if we have evidence for how he did it, let's look for that. And I'm glad that he gave us that.
Yeah. And if it is, in fact, a supernatural act of God within nature is something. If he does something in nature that has been witnessed, like the miracles of Jesus, the healings of Jesus, the raising of Lazarus, and so forth, then the evidence is going to back that up. So it's not this, it's just faith. It's just faith. I don't need evidence. It's just faith. But it's funny, Dale, that the Bible never defines faith that way. It never says that faith is a leap into the dark. It's rather a leap into the light. And the way the Bible defines faith in Hebrews 11 verse 1, it says faith is the evidence of things not seen, the substance of things hoped for. And so it speaks of faith as not this blind thing that you just hope in against all odds. It actually says that it is the evidence of things hoped for. And so something like the resurrection of Jesus is an event, and it's falsifiable, isn't it? I mean, in philosophy, you talk about falsifiability and unfalsifiability. The resurrection of Jesus is falsifiable in that all they had to do was simply produce the corpse. All they had to do was produce the body, and it would be game over for the church, for the Christian movement. But to say something like, well, Muhammad had an experience in a cave where he was attacked by a spirit and he was choked and so forth. Well, that's unfalsifiable. There's no witnesses there. It's his word against yours. So that is the thing that differentiates, I think, Christianity from all the other world religions, is that we have a founder who is alive and who lived. And I think of the words of people like the late astronomer Carl Sagan, who once said, "Extraordinary claims, demands extraordinary evidence." And Dr. William Craig rightfully responded to that and basically said, well, no, all you need is evidence that this man is alive, this man died, and then he's alive again. That doesn't need extraordinary evidence. It's eyewitness testimony that verified that, yeah, he was dead. He was clinically dead. And then 3 days later, he's alive again, and he's eating with us, and he's tangible, and we can touch him. Again, this is the thing that really differentiates the Christian faith from everything else, because in all the other religious faiths, their founders are dead. They all share that in common. It's the common denominator. They're all dead. But in the Christian faith, and as you know, Dale, the Christian faith rests or falls on this pivotal event called the resurrection. If Christ did not rise from the dead, the Christian faith is the biggest scam ever put into the world.
We're still in our sins, right? Our
Yeah.
faith's in vain. So
Yeah. And so the resurrection. I mean, I'm putting out a video very shortly now as Martin Luther King Jr. Day is coming out of the United States, and a lot of folks don't know this, but Martin Luther King actually denied the resurrection of Jesus, the bodily resurrection. He actually believed it was just a symbol for something else. Okay. But this goes to show us that the man on that shroud really lived, and that he died, that he truly died. He didn't appear to die, as the Gnostics said, but he really died. And that this was not some symbol; it was a real man, and that he entered into the world, and that he claimed that he would die and that he would rise again on the third day. And so the Shroud of Turin, I think, remains a piece of evidence that we really have to take seriously, because the evidence, as you have shown, is just overwhelming.
Absolutely. And I'm just getting started. Like, you have no idea how much I had to select out to present what I was doing here. So
I believe you. So
I just wanted to highlight one thing that I really liked what you said, because I was about to disagree with you, but then I realized, no, I'm wrong. Tony's right. Where this issue of falsifiability, right? So I think that there's a difference between theoretical falsifiability and practical falsifiability. And I think what your point was is that your Christianity is unique from a practical ability to falsify its faith, whereas something like Islam or other religions, that theoretically there are ways to falsify it. Such theoretically, if I traveled back in time and went to that cave, but practically speaking, there aren't really ways to falsify the essential claims of the other faiths in the same way there is with Christianity and the resurrection. So I think that was a great point you raised.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, even in Matthew 27, you have the first naturalistic explanation for the resurrection was the conspiracy theory, that the religious leaders paid off the guards to say, well, in the night while we were asleep, they came and they stole the body, and they made up the whole thing. And implicit within that explanation is a realization that the tomb was empty. They're simply trying to explain how it got empty, and they're saying it was done by it was a body snatching. They snatched the body and simply took it out. But the only way that the early religious leaders could have disproven the Christian faith was if they produced the body. If they could produce the body, then the resurrection claim would have fallen down like a house of cards.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Dale. I appreciate that. We have a question here from is Dale familiar with Mattingly or Devon's image formation theory this is Annette Cloutier.
Yeah. Okay. So not offhand by the names, but if you could maybe clarify, like what is their theory in a basic nutshell? Like, is it related to? Is it somewhat kind of artistic theory or something like that? It's not. The names aren't ringing a bell though.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, we have. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm just looking at this one here. By Jeffrey Moliki. How amazing is it that we have the Shroud of Jesus and the Tilma of Mary, both miraculous fabrics, delicate yet still with us, both documenting factual times in history. Now we've been talking about the shroud. Now the question of the tilma, I believe the tilma has to do with the belt, the cloth belt that Mary had for her dress, I believe it was. That's a completely different topic altogether. And I personally would not give too much credence to that. It's a completely different category altogether in terms of the shroud. So, I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, Dale, the Tilma of Mary.
I am, yes. So, so the Tilma of Mary, so this is comparable to the shroud. So it's based on the Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Marian apparition. And basically there's supposedly, according to Roman Catholics, a miraculous image of Mary on this tilma. And so I think what he's pointing out is that it's amazing that there's a supernatural preservation, right? So in the case of the Shroud of Turin, I've heard some scholars argue this isn't a minimal relevant feature, so I don't use this, but some say that the feel of the shroud, it's been supernaturally preserved because of the radiation. So the feel of it, if you were to touch it, it's like a modern t-shirt. Now, even if the shroud is medieval, it should be far more brittle and falling apart. I mean, we have textiles from the ancient world. These things are in horrid condition. So the shroud is remarkably, almost supernaturally preserved. And there is the same claim with the tilma of Mary. But the problem with that is when scientists look into it, that it's not made of the material that Roman Catholics say it is. It's some kind of cactus material that is durable, and there isn't anything remarkable about it. It's the fact that it has survived to this day. So there is a disanalogy there, but I get that both people make that argument about supernatural preservation of the fabrics itself.
Okay. Well, Dale, it looks like the cat's out of the bag here a little bit. So,
Jamie,
so you may want to say something, Dale.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was originally going to be scheduled in January, but we've had to kind of postpone, and I think for the better, because as Tony knows, I have for a long time now, as Gary's been working on his 4 volumes, his MO on the resurrection research and the historical evidence there. I wanted to bring on Gary Habermas and kind of celebrate, number one, his legacy, but all of his decades of research on the resurrection. And I don't want to do that alone. I want to bring on the ultimate resurrection panel. So I've got Tony Costa coming on with me. So it'll be Gary Habermas, Tony Costa, Mike Lacona, Sean McDowell, and Ben Shaw, all joining me to do a 3-hour marathon, kind of celebrating Gary's legacy, but then also looking at the newest resurrection research. How can we prove through historical evidence, as opposed to the scientific evidence on the shroud, that Jesus actually rose from the dead? And that's what's amazing. We don't just have scientific evidence, we've got the empirical for the atheists, but we've also got amazing historical evidence as well, that these are independent avenues of proving the resurrection. And just want to say, so the Shroud Explorations, so this is my friend Jamie Castro, who's Shroud Explorations here. And I should mention, he's sort of helped me, because I'm trying to branch out, kind of like you, Tony. I'm trying to branch out and teach in churches. So bring my podcast and teach in churches or Christian schools and stuff. And so I've called those Bible studies the Shroud Explorations. Let me just share my screen. I can just show you guys
Sure.
what the website there, because Jamie will kill me if I forget to show you guys. So hopefully, let me know when that's up. Is that showing up?
Let me bring it up here on my end. Is this it?
Does it say Happy New Year?
It says Happy New Year 2025.
Awesome. So yeah, this is for my Bible studies. It's shroudexplorations.wordpress.com. Again, I want to say thank you to Jamie, because he's the one who kind of made this professional site and stuff. But it's so yeah, I can come. It's not just about the shroud. Right now I'm at Oakwood with our mutual friend, Reverend Sully Prince, and I'm teaching on the historical evidence for the resurrection. But yeah, I'm able to teach about different topics, including the Shroud of Turin at your church or Christian school. If you're interested in that, just contact me at my email, realseekerministry@gmail.com. And yeah, I would love to come and teach Christian apologetics at your church, just like Tony does. He's been a great mentor, so I want to pay it forward.
Absolutely. And so, folks, what I'm going to do is there is a link in the description to Dale's YouTube channel and other resources. I'll place that email there as well after the show. I'll place it there so you guys can access that. So what I would highly recommend, folks, is to get Dale to speak on this at your church. And so if you live in the Toronto area, where we're both from, I'm not doxing ourselves here.
No,
not doxing ourselves, Dale. I'm just mentioning that if you're in the Toronto, Canada area, Dale is a Torontonian like myself, and so he's available to be there in the flesh and present. And I believe you also do online teaching as well.
yeah,
Dale?
yeah. So if you're outside Toronto, I can do the virtual Zoom stuff as well.
Yeah. So if you're not, so again, if you're in the United States or the United Kingdom or wherever you may be on God's planet Earth, Dale can still come on virtually and present and then take questions. And so I would highly recommend connecting with Dale on this topic. And I can vouch for the fact that he's been doing this for many years. He's been studying this for many years. And like I said, when I first met Dale way back at the seminary in Toronto where I was teaching as a student of mine, Dale was the type of guy that he wanted to know and he wanted to get to the bottom of things. He didn't just simply accept it on blind faith. He wanted to look at the evidence. Is this worth believing? Is this credible? And so you're getting someone here that can give you some solid evidence, good arguments, good data that you could use in your Christian witness as well for the veracity of the Christian faith. And so I highly recommend Dale to you on that. Let's take another question, maybe a few more, and then we can end up. So we've got Matt Clayton. He asks, did you guys mention the Hood of Orvieto?
Absolutely. So it was in the first part of my presentation, but Hood is not a good. It's the Sudarium of Oviedo in Spain, and that's where I was talking about how the blood stains. Forensic experts have studied the blood stains and body fluids and deduced that the anatomical features, they match with the blood stains corresponding to the face and the crown of thorns or cap of thorns, as Tony gave us correctly there. They match up and they align to a significant degree, to the point where forensic experts are saying these two cloths covered the same bloodied head. And where's the only place that these two cloths, from their known histories, could have been together covering the same corpse? The only place is Jerusalem, because the Sudarium has a known history going back to Jerusalem at the latest around 570 AD or earlier. And it's claimed to be the headcloth of Jesus. And I think it's the St. Monastery of Mark in one of the historical documents there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the only place the shroud could admit that was in Jerusalem.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned the headcloth, because a lot of folks, some critics of the shroud have brought that up, that in the Gospel of John, we're told that the headcloth was neatly folded and it was separate from the shroud, which is interesting. And so I appreciate you mentioning that. We have someone here, Dale, who's singing your praises. Dale Glover is one of the best Bible teachers I've ever heard. Check him out. Nice. So, and that really warms my heart to hear that, because like I said, if you knew Dale when I first met him, he was a skeptic par excellence. And again,
I don't know how you put up with me, because I think I remember I sent you, like, I would send long emails. Like I think at one point I sent like a 70-page email on the tire process. So thank you for putting up with me.
And it was like an essay.
Yeah.
And folks, you need to understand. And Dale was again just a lot of questions, and he really wanted to get to the bottom of this. And so to just see how far you've come, Dale, it's such an inspiration, and I thank God for that, because it really does show the transforming power of God's grace and how God could take a skeptic and again, I mean, James, the brother of the Lord, James was a skeptic. He didn't believe in Jesus during his own lifetime, and it took the resurrection to turn James into a believer and become the leader of the Jerusalem church and author one of our epistles in the New Testament named after him, the Epistle of James, which is the Lord's brother, and then of course his other brother Jude. So it's just amazing just to see how God has really brought you to this point, and it's just incredible. And let me see. We have a couple of other. Let me see here. We have someone. Yes, Jacqueline. I think I know. I think I know who you are, sister. The best thing to do, Jacqueline, is I know the folks at Trinity Baptist Church in Burlington. I've spoken there, as you know. I've taught there and preached there. The best thing to do is, excuse me. The best thing to do is just say, look, Tony Costa had Dale Glover on his YouTube channel, and he's highly recommended. Again, just tell them that he was on my channel, and they know who I am, and just encourage them to get Dale on, or even refer this video to them. Tell them to check out the video and get Dale there for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Yeah. Okay. Here's this. This really is. This is really encouraging. Matt Clayton says it's what made me a believer. So, folks, when people say, "Well, does the shroud matter? Is it really that important?" Well, we have someone here who became a believer because of it. And again, God uses means. God can use any means He wishes to bring someone to faith through the power of the gospel. But God uses means, and so here we see an example, and this just goes to show, doesn't it, Dale, that your work is not in vain, that this work is important, and again, someone like Gary Habermas, who we both know who he is. Gary Habermas is one of the leading evangelical scholars on the resurrection of Jesus, right. And he's even looked at the shroud and said, "I can't get around it. This looks like the real thing. This is the burial cloth of Jesus."
Absolutely. Yeah. You're very well said. And one thing I just want to add with this is, so I always get questions from the other end saying, well, is the shroud essential for my salvation and or to be a Christian? And I always say absolutely not, right? Like you don't need to believe in the shroud's authenticity to be saved or to be a Christian or anything like that. But the point that we're making is the same that Matt is. Look, it's in terms of evidence for the gospel message. And for some people, the minimal facts approach is enough for them to believe, or messianic prophecies is the evidence that gets them to believe. For people like Matt, it's the shroud. And in other cases, for me, it was actually 4 different things combined. So I needed the Shroud of Turin, the historical evidence from the appearance to the 12, and what I call the vindication prediction argument. So basically Mike Lacona's research on proving historically that Jesus predicted his resurrection. I think that's a miracle in and of itself, given it was fulfilled. And also what William Lane Craig calls the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, which produced a properly basic belief within me that Christianity is true. So for me, it was a combination. It wasn't any one thing. It was 4 things together that pushed me over the line and gave me the 53, it's going to sound weird, but 53.14% probability using Bayes' theorem that Christianity is true. And I committed on that basis.
Yeah. I remember that at your baptismal service where I baptized you, and you mentioned that in your testimony, and it was just how honest you were about that. You were just so open and transparent about that, and I really appreciated that. And I would say you're right. I would say that the shroud is supplementary. It's, we think of, for example, our archaeology. I teach, of course, at the University of Toronto on archaeology of the Bible in the ancient Near East. And a lot of the students are just absolutely astounded at the documentary evidence that we find in archaeological data, in ancient cylinders, and that we find in ostraca, in vases, for example, inscriptions and so forth, that validate biblical cities and biblical kings that are mentioned in the Bible, biblical prophets like Isaiah, for example, and even in the Galilee, they found what they called the Jesus boat. And I'm sure when you were in Jerusalem, in your journey there, I'm sure you saw the Jesus boat dates to the 1st century. It was found.
I wish I did. No,
yeah,
I didn't.
Submerged in the Sea of Galilee, and it was submerged there for almost 2,000 years. And then they brought it up, and they've actually dated it to the 1st century, to the time of Jesus. And it could have been one of the boats he traveled on, but all of that is supplementary. It's history is God's it's God's it's been called God's cross theater. It's the stage upon which God unfolds his purpose and his plan of redemption. And so if the incarnation is God entering into time, which is what we celebrated at Christmas, the incarnation, then that incarnation would have left some imprint in the space-time continuum, some imprint. I think the shroud is one example of that.
Awesome. Yeah, well said. Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, let me see here. We're almost done. You're okay with time, Dale?
Absolutely, as long as you need. So whenever you want.
All right, that's very kind of you. We have Protestant Believer. Can you link Shroud Exploration's YouTube channel, please? Is that part of
my YouTube channel? So Shroud Explorations, that's my Bible study website, but my YouTube channel. So my main podcast is Real Seekers.
Okay.
Or you can go to realseekerministries.wordpress.com for my podcast website.
Okay.
If you want me to show that, I can bring that up.
Okay, please. Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Please,
Let me do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it's on my podcast, Real Seekers, where you'll see people like Tony Costa. So here's my Real Seekers blog, realseekerministries.wordpress.com, where
I'll bring that up on the screen. There we go.
All right. So I have blogs where I post up sources for the various shows that I do, or on YouTube, just go to Real Seekers, plural, with an S. And here I am with
hello and welcome back to Real Seeker.
It's David Falk. Let me just show the page so you can see. It's got my picture in Jerusalem. So this is my YouTube channel.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So look into that, guys. Okay. Well, I think I don't think we have any more questions, but Dale, if there was something that you could leave with our viewers, what would it be? What would your message be to our viewers who are probably learning about this? I'm sure they've heard of the Shroud of Turin, but they probably haven't heard about the information that you presented. What would you say to them?
Yeah, so if you're totally new to the Shroud, and let's say you're even perhaps somewhat skeptical or leery of it, because a lot of Christians are. I myself was. I thought I just dismissed it as some kind of Catholic issue. But what I would like you to know is that, look, scholars from all walks of life, the Shroud of Turin is not a Catholic thing. The Catholic Church does not officially endorse the Shroud. You don't have to venerate it or anything like that. I don't venerate it or bow down to any created object in this world. I bow down to Jesus. But what the Shroud is, it's not some alternative gospel. It's not a set of propositions or a false gospel. It's evidence supporting the gospel we do have. As Gary would put it, the deity, death, and resurrection of Jesus, those fundamental essentials are authenticated by the Shroud evidence, right? And in the same way, we get historical evidence for Jesus' existence in Josephus. I'm not venerating or worshiping Josephus. I'm using it as evidence to support that Jesus existed. So, yeah, the Shroud provides us with evidence. It provides us with a clearly dead man. He's got the chest wound alone would have killed him, which corresponds with the Gospel of John. He's got literally hundreds of scourge wounds, which are invisible to the naked eye. They show up only under ultraviolet fluorescence studies. So again, imagine an artist creating invisible blood serum retraction rings and scourge wounds and stuff like that. I don't buy that, but complete with all of this. So I think it's just incredible evidence, and it supports the gospel message, and that's all it is. You don't have to treat it as anything else. So yeah, when you're getting started, go to various websites, look at both sides. Look, when I was studying this, I didn't just get it from the pro Shroud side or one side. Look at both sides, and I think you'll find that the evidence is so strong and so clear that it can overwhelm any skeptic's objection. And probably the best website is shroud.com, where you can get resources on either on any side, from all sides, type thing. So yeah, just try your best and have faith in the Holy Spirit that he'll guide you through this evidence, and he will guide us into all truth. So yeah.
Yes, indeed. You know, and it's interesting you said that too, because the figure on the shroud, the face looks inflamed. I mean, you could see there's bruising, there's an inflammation. And I think some have even suggested that the upper lip has been ruptured on the image, and so this would substantiate what we know about. You know, the Gospels tell us that they punched him, they blindfolded him, they would strike him and say, you know, prophesy who struck you. And we know that the Romans, when they basically put someone through the process of crucifixion, they were brutal, and the scourging was so bad. You know, Josephus says that you could see the intestines sometimes, because the scourge would rip the flesh and the blood vessels and so forth. And so when I look at that, you clearly see a man who was severely beaten, bludgeoned. You know, and then I think of Isaiah's prophecy that his appearance, his visage was so marred, beyond human comprehension, that we would turn our faces away from him, because of how bloodied he was. And so the brutality that you see there, again, the depictions of the crucifixion, the majority that I have seen, Dale, you have a victim on the cross with very little lacerations on the body. You know, the only blood is from the head and the hands and feet and the side, but this figure was clearly brutally beaten before he died. Yeah,
there's like 130 on the frontal image alone, and I think over 200 on the dorsal side image. So
yes, and the buttocks as well, which would indicate that he was stripped naked when they were flogging him. That would indicate that. So, folks, just want to thank all of you guys for giving up your Thursday evening to be with us. Dale, that was a remarkable presentation. And let me just say, as a former professor of yours, that I'm very proud of you. You've come a long way. And I hope you consider doctoral studies, maybe in an area related to this. And I don't know how many dissertations have been written on this topic, but I really thank you for just coming on and just sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And it was truly a blessing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pleasure. I remember ever since I converted, I always wanted to come on your channel and kind of share and talk to you, because you're someone that I've always looked up to in terms of how you are as a teacher, a Christian apologist, and a pastor as well. So you've got that remarkable gift that you're also a good pastor, and that's something that I just don't have that skill set. But you and Gary Habermas and the rest of them, you guys are always the people I look up to. So
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Dale. I really appreciate that, and I'd love to have you on again.
Absolutely. So any particular topics you would want, or would you want me to?
You can bring them up, and they could be philosophical. I mean, we can even go into the ontological argument, and I just advise our viewers to bring their Tylenol along with them as we go into some deep thinking. But I mean, the sky's the limit, brother.
Awesome. Yeah. I will be there.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks again for joining us, and again, want to encourage you, if you have not done so already, my book, No King But Christ, is now out. Again, this is just a print copy, so that's why you see that gray bar there. The collapse and bankruptcy of secular worldview. So what I do in this book, I do deal with, obviously, the historical Jesus, but I also deal with where we are today in our world and why we are in the mess we are. And one of the reasons is because we have rejected the king. The king who was the lawgiver, the stabilizer of society, and of course, the king that gives meaning and purpose and value to our existence. And so I would encourage you to get that book. It is a great gift for those who are going into college or university, higher education, and it's layman's level. So it's not overly academic, but anyway, it's all available on Amazon. So thanks again, everybody. And until next time, the Lord bless you, and you take care of yourselves. Bye for now.
God bless.